Hello everyone, and welcome to vEcoLive. This is our beta software, which means that it's an unfinished, unpolished experience, but one that we're working on and that we hope will give you a chance to experience some of the most exciting conservation destinations in the world from the comfort of your living room. I apologize in advance for any glitches you may experience, and I thank you for all taking the time out of your day to try out this experimental software. The last show went fairly well, and so I'm pretty confident you'll have a good experience today. At the end of the tour, we're going to share a link to a survey, and if you wouldn't mind filling that out and letting us know where you're from and how your experience went, that will help us improve. Now let's get started becoming comfortable with the interface. We are going to be going through a series of fully spherical panoramas, which means that if you click your mouse and hold down the left button and then drag your mouse, you should be able to look anywhere you feel like looking. To the left, to the right, straight up, and straight down. Right now we're in an orbit over our dear planet, and you can see the Milky Way and the Sun. And you may notice that you can even see the lights of the planet's great population centers popping into view and out again in the dark part of the Earth. Now, periodically as we go through the tour, your host will direct your attention to various features in the panorama like this. That's so that the host can point out something of interest for you to look at. But as soon as that's happened, you can then take your mouse and look elsewhere. The idea is that you are a tourist and you can control what you look at. You will also be experiencing a series of photos and videos. When the host clicks on one, for example, a map of the area we're going to be looking at today, you will see that video or still photo for a moment, and when the host closes it, you will go back to your normal view. If at any point you wish to get rid of the video or the photo, you can click on the little X button yourself as well. Next up is the interface that you'll see at the bottom of your screen in the middle. There's a chat bubble icon, which we'll discuss in a moment, a little speaker icon, a full screen button, and a help screen. The help screen will remind you of how to use the interface. The full screen button will give you a little more screen real estate. And the mute button is for turning off the ambient audio that you'll hear during the tour if it's too loud for you or if you need a break. Now, vEcoLive has as its main purpose to share this virtual voyage both with the tour guide and with each other. So on the right-hand side of the box, you'll see a chat window where you can ask questions, share information you might have, and discuss the tour in general. If you have any problems, feel free to tell us about them there, and we'll do our best to help you. On this call, in addition to myself, I'm Jay Ploss, the vEco project manager. We have Mark Laxer, the project director and founder, Matt Redmond, our technical website guru, and Gary Smith, our video editor and consultant and able volunteer. There is one more feature I'd like to mention before we get started, which is the chat bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. By clicking on that and dragging it into the panorama scene, you're able to ask a question in the text box that is attached to the panorama. So that's a way that you can point out things to our attention. If you see something interesting in the panorama and want to know more about it, such as a species of tree or a bird in the distance, you can use this feature to ask us what you're looking at. I would encourage you all to ask as many questions as you feel like. That's what this tour is for. And please give that feature a try now. As a little challenge, can anybody find the Milky Way? Mark and monkeys, that is the sun. Well done. Welcome back again, Sharpie. Sharpie joined us on the first tour and apparently is back for more. Thank you for joining us. Gary, Mark and Monkeys, and Matt. Yes, that is the Milky Way. We have an excellent view here in space, which is not quite realistic. When you're actually in space, the light from the Earth and the sun are so bright that the stars are essentially invisible. Now that we've had a tour of the interface, I'm going to introduce our tour guide. Let me just remind you again that if any point you're having trouble during the tour, feel free to ask a question in the chat box. If something is broken, I would encourage you to please hit the refresh button on your browser or the F5 button. That usually solves most of the problems you might experience. Now, today we're going to be taking part one of our Virunga Volcanoes tour. This is a region in Africa where Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo share a border. And these are a series of dramatic ancient volcanoes that are home to half the world's population of mountain gorillas. The other half is nearby, but we'll get to that in a moment. Without further ado, your tour host today is Mr. Ian Redmond. He is our vEcoTourism advisor and ambassador, and he has been working in the Virungas region since 1976, when he joined Dian Fossey's research crew as a research assistant. He has been involved in the Virungas region and as a conservationist for the last 40 years, and he established and chairs the Ape Alliance, a consortium of ape NGOs and other organizations dedicated to their conservation. And he served as the ambassador for the UN Year of the Gorilla in 2009 and was awarded an Order of the British Empire for services to conservation in 2006. There aren't very many people alive on the planet today that have as extensive experience with the East African Virunga region as Ian Redmond, although perhaps there may be someone on this call who could rival Ian. Without further ado, I give you Ian Redmond.
Thank you, Jay. And once again, I think this is the coolest waiting room of any safari I've ever taken. Just to add a little interest, let me play you some Earth song. Because if instead of ears you had radio antennae, then this is what you'd hear. This is recorded by NASA, the radio waves of the interaction between incoming radiation and the Earth's magnetic field. It is an amazing sound, entirely natural. So just look at the Earth. Notice, as Jay said, how the lights of the populated regions go out as the Earth rotates into the daylight. And just to get you orientated, this is where we're going. You saw a map of Africa. we're going to the point where East Africa meets Central Africa, just on the border of Uganda, the DRC, and Rwanda. And we're jumping from space down to the summit of one of the volcanoes there, Mount Sabinyo. Sabinyo has a series of teeth-like peaks, and we're now clinging to the side of the second peak. You can look around, use your arrows on your keyboard or your mouse to drag it around and see the view in different directions, or you can just let it slowly rotate and get a feel for where you are. The rather irregular ladder-like structure is a sort of a boardwalk that's built by the Uganda Wildlife Authority rangers to protect the vegetation from climbers. It's very steep, and the very fragile vegetation and thin layer of soil would soon be kicked off by the boots of climbers. So they build a boardwalk, just like you might walk along a boardwalk in a bog or wetland nature reserve, but here the boardwalk is almost vertical, and you find yourself climbing up this ladder-like structure stuck on the side of a very steep mountain, hoping that it's well secured. Let me illustrate that with a little bit of video.
You know what they say about put not thy faith in man-made things? On this occasion you have to put your faith in it.
Now, the climbers here are a group of volunteers who are working on a safari with the Great Projects. It's a company that takes volunteers to help with conservation work and community work. And we've been working in Rwanda, and some of us took a day off from the going around schools with conservation education materials to climb Sabinyo.
This is my first time up the third of Sabinyo's teeth, and it is outstanding. The cloud is clearing. The view down there into Rwanda is extraordinary. Down there is into Uganda, and when we get over the summit, we'll be looking down into the DRC.
So please forgive my dodgy camera work, clinging to the side of a ladder on the side of a mountain, but we can continue up to the summit to the point where the three countries meet. Well, Sharpie and Rebecca are enjoying the view from the comfort of their sofa or desk. You're both on sofas. Okay, well this is the delights of virtual travel. Well, as you look around, you can see the volunteers huddled in the cold, and we're at 11,960 feet here, or if you prefer meters, 3,680. So we haven't got above the vegetation zone. On Karisimbi you actually get up to bare rock, but here you're in the Afro-Alpine zone. And if you look around, you may be able to see three giants. Why not use your chat bubble to point to anything you might think could be a giant? I'm very excited that Felix has joined us, because he probably knows these giants better than any of us. Tanya's asking about the vegetation type. As I say, this is what's generally called Afro-Alpine vegetation. The little pale green plant is Alchemilla, between the tussocks of grass. But what I was drawing your attention to was this area here. Let me just point you all towards that. In the center of your screen here is what looks like a giant heather plant, and it is in fact giant heath. So it's Erica, the same genus as heather. And as you're walking through a forest of this, you feel like a mouse walking through Scotland. It's amazing. Just to the right of the giant heath is a pointed flowering spike, which is giant lobelia, which is now central to your screen there, or just to the right of those green rings. And just on either side of the giant lobelia flowering spike, there are some green cabbagey looking plants, like a cabbage on stick. And those are giant senecio, or giant groundsel. So those are the three giants to which I alluded. Now let me give you a little bit of background to the history of this amazing place. Of course, in the 1880s, when this part of Africa was being argued over by the European powers, the mountain proved a convenient point on the map for them to draw their lines. And that's how we came to have the German sphere of influence, the British sphere of influence, and the Belgian sphere of influence meeting on this mountain top. Let me summarize.
So, sitting on the summit of Mount Sabinyo, it's a very historic spot, because this was the point where the European powers in the 19th century decided to make the protectorate of Belgium, Germany and Britain meet. That became the point where Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda down there all meet. It's also the mountain that in 1902 Captain Robert von Beringay, a German army officer from the German sphere of influence down there, decided as a sportsman, a gentleman, an officer, he would climb Mount Sabinyo. And on his way up Mount Sabinyo, he noticed on a ridge across a big ravine some big black apes of a kind that have not been described before by foreigners. Obviously the people that live around the mountain knew they were here all the time. But he shot two specimens and they fell deep into one of these ravines right down there. And he spent hours with ropes and porters and men to get them out. And he carried them back to Berlin, where they were described as a new species of gorilla. That's gorilla Virungi.
So this is the mountain where mountain gorillas were discovered by science. Of course, the people who lived around the Virungas knew they were there all along, but when scientists describe something, that's when it's officially acknowledged. Now, I see that people are asking what the yellow flowers are. I am not the world's greatest botanist, but I believe it's a genus called Coxia. That sometimes looks a bit like senecio. So if a botanist were to correct me and say it's another kind of senecio, I would accept that. And the camera bag, well, yes, it's my favourite camera bag. And it's quite a hefty thing to drag up to the top of a mountain. And indeed the panga came with me too, because for much of the climb you're going through forests, and I like to be able to hack my way through the undergrowth where necessary. So you're asking what the temperature is like up here, Sharpie. Bloody cold would be a quick way of describing it. Let me show you what happened just after that piece of camera was
Here we are
filmed.
in a hailstorm, going down the Lesson. Down the ladders.
The hail was actually quite large and pelting down on us, and we had very little in the way of protective clothing, so it was quite an enlivening experience. And what made it even more dramatic was the fact that we were in the clouds with a thunderstorm going around us, lightning crackling, and I'm walking along carrying a metal panger in my hand. But even the breeze up here is atmospheric, and the lichen, the usnea, sometimes called Spanish moss, although obviously we're not in Spain and it's not a moss, it's a lichen, or old man's beard it's sometimes called, that is blowing gently in the breeze and making the views look even more spectacular. I'm not sure if I can provide you with a close-up of the machete, but if you use your zoom and look at that point, you'll see it's actually a South American machete that I was given by a volunteer friend in New Guinea, and it's been traveling with me since 1979 and has cut hundreds of snares and many miles of path through dense vegetation. So I'm going to go from this point of historical significance and geographical significance to another extremely significant spot. So hold tight. And as the picture clears around you, you'll see we're now in a glade a couple of thousand feet lower down. This is at about 10,000 feet above sea level, 3,000 meters. And the typical vegetation type here is Hagania and Hypericum trees. And the large tree on the right of the picture that I've just shown you is a leaning Hagania trunk, the kind of trunk that it would be easy to build a little shelter under to get out of the rain. Now this is in the saddle between Mount Karisoke and Mount Karisimbi, and it's just on the edge of the site of what used to be the Karisoke Research Centre, founded by Dian Fossey. And if you look around, you will see that, in fact, we're beside what seems to be a graveyard with marker posts, and that's exactly what it is. This is where members of our study groups that were killed by poachers were buried. And just to the right of the gorilla graves lies Dian Fossey. Dian first came to the Virungas in 1967. It started on the Congo side, and then because of the civil unrest there, came over to Rwanda, and in September 67 founded the Karisoke Research Centre with a couple of tents in a clearing very close to this spot. I had the good fortune to join Dian as a newly qualified biologist in 1976 and spent 2.5 very happy years living up at this altitude in a cabin in the forest, helping Dian with her research and with her conservation work. Now, as we look around, I wanted to show you one or two things and tell you one or two stories. So Dian habituated the gorillas, that is, she got them used to her presence as a harmless observer. And by the time I got there, the gorillas really accepted Dian and anyone who was introduced to them by Dian or by people that they knew as almost an honorary member of the family. So you were able to sit there and take notes of their behavior, who was sitting next to whom, who was grooming whom, and so on. And gradually we were piecing together their family life. This was a day with Group 5. Normally we wouldn't go to the gorillas together, but Dian asked me to go with her that day to take photographs, possibly for use in her book. And she kindly returned the favour, so another picture you'll see later is taken in the same spot with Group 5, but with me taking the notes and Dian taking the photos. Now this infant gorilla is Poppy. And Poppy, I'm delighted to say, is still alive and well and living in the Susa group, who will be visiting later on in this safari. And of course, nowadays we discourage this kind of close contact because people are coming from over the world to see the gorillas and you don't want to pass on human diseases to them. But at that point, we were both living up in the forest in self-imposed quarantine for months on end, and the awareness of the risk of the health risk that we might pose to the gorillas was much less in our minds. And nowadays we try very hard to maintain a 7-meter distance between the gorillas and the humans. Now, working at Karisoke was pretty much every naturalist's or biologist's dream, because it's a fantastic location as long as you don't mind the cold and the wet and the solitude. And the natural history is not so well known. The gorillas have been studied a lot, but lots of the other species are less well known. And as an all-round naturalist, I was just in my element, collecting specimens for the Natural History Museum in London, dissecting animals, and of course, as the last picture shows, taking part in the anti-poaching patrols that Dian organised, standing there with a poacher's spear that's been confiscated from someone operating illegally in the park. Now that's a real problem because, of course, long before this area was designated a national park, in 1925, it was, of course, Africa's first national park. It was a hunting ground for the Batwa people and any other members of local communities that chose to go hunting. Traditional Rwandan society had 3 groups of people. The Batwa, who were generally short in stature and very skilled at hunting and deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, and they're also potters and musicians. The Bahutu are the people of middle stature who traditionally cultivated crops, cleared the forest and planted crops. And the tall cattle-keeping people, the Batutsi, who before the colonial period were the rulers of Rwanda. And there is disagreement as to whether these were 3 different tribes that coalesced to speak a single language, or whether there was one tribe that diverged according to their hierarchical position in society. But the traditional Rwandan view is that they're 3 brothers, so from the same family, who had different skills and different aptitudes. But in the modern Rwanda, they are all regarded as Banya-Rwanda, people of Rwanda, and happily the distinctions of the past are no longer a part of Rwandan society. But sadly, this forest is too small for there to be permanent hunter-gatherers living their traditional way of life. So the Batwa have had to integrate into Rwandan society and develop new skills so that they're a part of modern Rwanda. Just listen to the sound of the rain and take in this beautiful location. When I arrived at Karisoke, this was the cabin I lived in. It was in fact Dian Fossey's first cabin, and it was nestled in the trees, a little corrugated iron and timber shack lined on the inside with grass matting to give a little bit of insulation, because at night it was sometimes freezing cold, literally frost on the grass when you got up in the morning, and you needed a little pot-bellied stove to try and keep the cabin warm. But inside the cabin there was a desk and a bed and cupboards, and it all seemed very normal. And it's sometimes hard to remember that everything in that cabin, the cabin itself, bit by bit, was carried up the side of the mountain on the heads of the porters. Each day we'd go out to the gorillas and take our notes on their behavior and their movements around the forest, which plants they were eating, how they prepared the food and so on. And of course sometimes our research was interrupted by the presence of poachers, and we would cut the snares and sometimes capture the poachers. There you see a teenage Batwa poacher who was learning his father's trade, and Diane is smiling rather softly at him because she would of course not blame a child for doing what his parents instructed. But the fight against the poachers was sometimes serious, and we had the support of the National Park Rangers, but in the early days they were not as active as they should have been. So the men that Diane hired were providing the hard work and motivation and the skills to track the poachers and fight against these illegal activities in the national park. Happily now things are much, much better, and have been for decades now, because the Rwanda Development Board has highly skilled and motivated teams of rangers that still work with the rangers paid by the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund International that continues Diane's work, and in partnership they patrol the forest, and of course the veterinary surgeons in the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project, the gorilla doctors, look after the health of the gorillas, and it is perhaps one of the best protected parks in the world. Not only that, but the whole attitude towards gorillas in Rwanda has changed for the good. The best example of that is the Kwita Izina, the annual gorilla naming ceremony. Traditionally, the Kwita Izina is a naming ceremony in a village when a new baby is born, and everybody gets together to decide on the name and celebrate the new birth. And it was a masterstroke when the Rwanda Development Board decided to apply that same tradition to the gorillas. And each year, in a ceremony presided over by the President, or in this case the Prime Minister, thousands of people gather to what is like a cross between an open-air rock concert like Glastonbury or Woodstock, a political rally, or some kind of conservation celebration. And that's what it is. People are recognizing the importance of the gorillas and sharing this excitement over Rwanda's success in protecting the gorillas and having such a wonderful system of ecotourism. Now, on the main stage in the center here, let me draw your attention to it, you will see people standing in traditional Rwandan costume, and they're the ones who are given the honor of naming a gorilla. Sometimes they're visiting dignitaries, diplomats, film stars, sometimes they're rangers who have done particularly well that year, or students who have excelled in their year. But people who are selected to have the honor of naming a gorilla.
It's a real privilege to be given the task of naming a gorilla. And here, those accorded this privilege stand on stage awaiting their turn. To make a brief speech.
Which is so important because it recognizes the importance of the individual. Sometimes people, when talking about endangered species, think only of the species as a whole. But of course, a population of a species is made up of individuals, and it's clear when you're dealing with such intelligent, complex animals as gorillas, that the individual matters. It's such an exciting event. Some members of the audience, particularly the younger ones who are more agile, can't get a good enough view from ground level, and they release their inner gorilla
There's such a throng of local people enjoying the music, it's hard if you're at the back of the crowd to see what's going on. And that didn't stop these innovative kids, because if you live in rural Rwanda, it's not often you get to see a pop star perform, so climbing a tree to get a vantage point is the obvious thing to do.
The pop stars who perform here have a difficult task. Let me illustrate why. You've got a huge audience over here of the local people, and then on the opposite side of the green there are the visiting dignitaries. Let's see how Dr. Claude, a very popular Rwandan singer, deals with this.
Kwita Izina is quite challenging for a pop singer, because instead of the crowd being right in front of the stage, you've got two audiences. Well, on the right, you've got the VIP tent with hundreds of visiting guests and dignitaries from around the world. On your left, you've got thousands of people, which looks much more like an open-air pop concert like Glastonbury or something. So here, Dr. Claude, a Rwandan singer, is working the crowd like a true professional.
So it's a party, it's a gorilla naming ceremony, and there are of course the dignitaries. And at the moment we're on the press platform where we get a good view of everything, but let me take you across to the VIP tent. And here, as with any Rwandan party, we see the traditional dances. Rwanda has a fantastic culture of music and dance, and it's remained very pure, so it's acclaimed throughout the world for its beautiful costumes and complex rhythms. Got to see that. It was downloading rather jerkily on my video, so if you weren't getting it as smoothly as you would wish, please make a little note in the chat box or in the survey afterwards. I was rather surprised that the security men allowed me to be on this spot to take the pano, because to your left we are literally a few feet away from the feet of the Rwandan Prime Minister. He's just in this group here. Can you guess which one is the Prime Minister? Yes, if I'm asking you to point something out, it would be easiest if you use your chat bubble. I guess I can do that just to show you what we're talking about. This chap is the... Gary, yes, that's the one you might have thought it was going to be. Matt, no, he's dressed in traditional Rwandan dress, so he's one of the namers. That's the Prime Minister. And although we're not here to listen to political speeches, I should really just give him the floor for a moment out of respect. So here's the Rwandan Prime Minister.
Paul Kagame often attends the Kwita Izina, but on this occasion it was Rwanda's Prime Minister who was a guest of honour, and here he is making a speech to the crowd.
Normally, Kwita Izina is only reserved to human beings. However, given the value that Rwandans owe to mountain gorillas, they decided to introduce the ceremony of naming them as they do when they eat.
So the lesson I think Rwanda can send to the rest of the world is that conservation works when you have political will at the highest level, when you have the support of the surrounding community, and when you have the finances, which in this case are largely provided by NGO and donor support, and the income from the very successful ecotourism. Of course, you're at an event like this, not everyone is going to be as enthralled by the speeches as the crowd must have been.
The excitement of pop singers and politicians and visiting dignitaries didn't exactly impress everybody, as this little boy finds his own amusement playing on the cables carrying the power to the stage.
So that is the Kwita Izina. If ever you're in Rwanda at that time of year, which usually is in around June, but this year it was in September, but it's a fantastic occasion, a reason to visit Rwanda. Let's just close the show, as happened on this occasion, with the fabulous Intori dancers, traditionally the warrior dancers that would see off the enemies of Rwanda if they dared to cross the border into the kingdom before it was a republic. Here are the Intori dancers.
After the speeches and pop songs and everything else was over, it was left to the spectacular Intori dancers with their long sisal headdresses and spears and shields to close the show.
So what are we celebrating here? We're celebrating the mountain gorillas. So let me take you swiftly from Kinigi, the park headquarters, up onto the slopes of Karisimbi, the highest of the Virunga volcanoes, but we're only going up to about 10,500 feet. Hello Patrick, you joined us just as we left the gorilla naming party to go and see the gorillas. As the picture clears around you, it should be rotating, and you can see a family of gorillas in the foreground, bamboo beyond, because we're just at the top of the bamboo zone, much above this altitude, and it's too cold for bamboo. So the bamboo is important for gorillas because it's an important food plant in the shooting season. When the rain is falling and the bamboo shoots are growing, they're very nutritious. And there's also a group of visitors to see the gorillas who are getting a fantastic opportunity of seeing the gorillas in the open. Normally if they're under the bamboo it can be very dense and difficult to watch them, but these guys got lucky. They're all donors and supporters of the gorilla organization, so perhaps their support for gorillas was returned with a wonderful view of the gorillas. Now, as we came into this clearing, what surprised us was not the gorillas that we were expecting to see. We could hear them and we could see their trail, but across the clearing we saw something that is less often seen with the gorillas, although you can now go and see them on their own. And that's the only other non-human primate that lives in the Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda. But I can see that that video is still downloading. So I'm going to have to wait and show you. Let me introduce you first to Edward, our gorilla guide. Edward is one of the best known guides. His smile is famous worldwide. So that's one of the great things about visiting Rwanda. You're greeted by smiles and a very warm welcome. I now see that the unexpected primates have downloaded. So let me introduce you to the famous golden monkeys. Very rare to get a glimpse of them in the same scene as a family of gorillas. So who have we got in this family? You can probably see the silverback in the middle here, and you might assume that he's the dominant male, but in fact he's not. This is number 2.
Ian, the female who came from Pablo.
You can see how the second in command immediately gives way to the dominant male as he comes through the clearing. But the rest of the family stay around and just get on with the games. See those lovely play faces with the open mouth, laughing expression.
This pile of playful gorillas gives you a good idea of what life is like during a siesta with a gorilla family. Notice how the youngsters, when they're playing, have the same sort of facial expression as a laughing, giggling human toddler. What's called a play face is very much just a laughing face.
While the kids play, the silverback, before he was moved off by the boss,
has a good
had a
watch?
nice little snooze.
Okay. Finished 11. team. Really good. Very good.
Grooming is important in primates because it keeps them clean. It also reinforces social bonds, but this mother is grooming her infant just to make sure that his fur is clean and that it'll keep him warm at night, because mountain gorillas live high in the cold mountains. And on a sunny day like today, what better than to be groomed by your mum? Although I think this infant would probably rather be playing with his friends.
I do apologise where the narration is overlapping my introduction, and that's because there's a lag on the telephone line that's giving you the voiceover, and some of the videos have got soundtracks and some of them haven't. And I'm sometimes expecting them to and they don't, and sometimes I expect they don't and they do, which is exciting. Anyway, let us see what happens when we move on beyond this open glade and under the bamboo. Young gorillas are very inventive in their play, and they really get the most out of what is essentially a natural jungle gym, with ropes to swing on and bars to climb on, and branches to break and even dangle upside down from. All under the watchful eye of the silverback. Now, this is a multi-male group where there's not only two silverbacks, there's actually a third. Let me introduce you to Kiki, the group's number 3 silverback. He's spending his time grooming on the outskirts of the group, keeping his head down, as it were, metaphorically speaking, because he doesn't want to get in the way of the dominant silverback or the number 2 contender to the throne. So he'll know where they are, he'll keep his ears open, but he'll avoid trouble until such time he's feeling strong enough to challenge them, or alternatively to take off on his own and become a lone silverback and try and attract some females to start his own family. It's these changing family relationships and the communication between individuals that makes watching other primates, and indeed human primates, so interesting. Let me show you a little interaction between a couple of females. One on the left is grunting in objection as the others come in, and that this female wants to be very submissive, very clearly crawling in on her elbows to look to minimize any threat that she might pose to the disgruntled female. So you might be wondering what these lucky people thought when they finished their gorilla watching. Just before we leave this gorilla safari, let's hear it from them.
It's my 28th birthday today, and this is literally the best birthday present I could have asked for.
I'm pretty fortunate. I've done some really amazing things in my life, but this is right up there. Absolutely amazing.
That was just sensational, and words don't describe it.
That was spectacular, and I also don't want to leave.
Words cannot do this justice. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life.
Can't quite describe it. It's been absolutely amazing, and even whilst I'm standing here with the gorilla peg at the top of the tree, it's amazing.
So I hope you had a similarly amazing experience, if only virtually. You had your audio and your visual senses stimulated. I'm sorry we haven't yet got smell to entertain you, but let me now take you back to the amazing waiting room until next week, when we have our second part of the Virunga Volcanoes safari, where we'll be going over to the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo side. Thanks for joining us.
Kavi, rasigara jani na uruguru cyangwa tutigumya. Ya kurindi. Tutigumya.